All right. Well, welcome, Clean Techers. We are back for the ninth Clean Tech editors and reporters webinar. Those two extra words are important since we've got Dan Garino with Inside Climate News. We're delighted to have him join as a first timer and a reporter. We're going to expand these to start including people doing important reporting on the space, although many of the editors both edit and report as well. And we're delighted to have John Engel join us from Renewable Energy World for the first time. So welcome, John and Dan, your first time. And we've got a lot of our regular crew that's been with us throughout all 9, which is really great to have you all back. So I just want to welcome everybody who's listening in. These have become quite the fixture among clean tech circles. As we travel places, we keep hearing how much people like to hear from the editors and reporters. And I think that's because they not only are they de facto influential in how our sectors are seen, they're also influential on how companies are seen. And this gives you a really rare window to understand what they see and the sector through their eyes. So anyway, I just, these have really stood the test of time and have proved to be, I think, quite a resource for the clean tech sectors writ large. So I want to welcome everybody back. So I'm Mike Casey. I run TigerCom, which is a Marcom public affairs firm. I'm the least important person on this call. We want to hear from the editors and reporters. We're going to lose Zach Shahan of Clean Technica at the 30-minute mark, but we would rather have him on for 30 than not have him on for the full hour. All right, so let me just do a quick intro. Heather, starting with you. Just
yeah, Heather Clancy, the editorial director at GreenBiz.
How about you, Tim?
So I'm Tim Sylvia. I'm an editor at PV Magazine USA. I guess PV Magazine at large, but namely PV Magazine USA.
Zach
Shahan, CEO of Clean Technica.
Darius
Sneakers, editor-in-chief of Recharge.
And Jeff.
Hi, I'm Jeff St. John. I'm director of news and special projects at Canary Media.
And if there was a background contest, Jeff, I think with the hat and the stringed instrument in the background, you would take us all by storm. So I just want a hat tip there. All right, Shahan's got to he's got to show us all up. All right, Yulia.
Hi, I'm Yulia Georgiou, reporter and editor at Utility Dive.
And John.
I'm John Engel, the content director at Renewable Energy World.
All right, last but not least, Dan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Garino. I cover the business of the transition to clean energy, and I also cover the Midwest for Inside Climate News.
Great. Okay, let me start off. We're at the end of 4 months into the new year. Certainly a lot has happened. We've got tyrannical dictators invading countries. We've got tariffs. We've got a lot going on here. And so I just want to ask this open question. What are the 3 biggest developments you've seen emerge in the first 4 months of this year? Zach, let me start with you since we lose you early.
Well, I will go back to one of my favorites, just the European EV market share. The market share of new car sales that are plug-in vehicles continues to really climb fast in Europe. It's about reaching about 1 out of 5 now. So I think this is just tremendous positive, even for people who are very bullish on EVs. It's been, I think, better than expected often. Of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I think it's very extremely unfortunate. Interestingly, my first clean tech tour and conference was in Kiev and Crimea, just a few months before Crimea was invaded. So it's always, the people I met there are wonderful, tremendous. They had a really great sense of energy independence and the importance of clean energy way back then. And I think that they had a lot of clarity on the risks of dependence on fossil fuels that maybe a lot of us don't have as well, or haven't had as well. But this is clearly a big global story in the market and will continue to be one. Especially, I don't think there's going to be any lessening of the desire to impose sanctions on Russian oil and gas. I think they'll only increase. And on the U.S. side, just sticking with the plug-in topic, since I know a lot of people here will cover solar and wind anyway. I think it's been really inspiring that, aside from, of course, Tesla, which dominates the U.S. market, The Ford F-150 Lightning is arriving. It's a really attractive electric pickup truck. They've doubled they were going to produce 80,000 a year. And they've earlier this year, they said that they would change that to increase that to 150,000 a year by mid 2023. So it's not really as high as I think it could and should be, but it's a good start. And that's also inspired GM. The Chevy Silverado EV has also appeared and is a very attractive electric pickup as well. So we're going to have real attractive options with good specs and good prices in the biggest auto market in the US. That arrives in 2023. So we still, it's not exactly this year, but the kind of the start of this kind of move is happening. So I think that's something big to celebrate.
And I think I can get Heather and Darius as the long timers, Constance, to validate this, but this is a personal growth moment for Zach, because in his top 3, he did not cite Elon Musk.
I am not touching. I'm not touching any of that right now.
Despite the Twitter purchase, Zach, this is a moment of maturity through the whole world. This is great. Good.
You don't want to see me rant about my sociological thoughts on democracy and content moderation.
We don't. We're going to move right along. We're going to bring adult supervision in with John Engel. John, what are the 3 big trends you're seeing emerge this year?
Yeah, I'm glad you went to me second so that I can steal the easy one. I mean, it's obvious that a lot of us are focused on Oxen and the tariff petition that is being reviewed by Commerce right now. I think there's a lot of ways to approach the Oxen solar tariff petition discussion, from the domestic manufacturing point of view to the threat of climate change point of view, and deploy as fast as we can. And then the geopolitical ramifications of, energy independence and supply chain and all of these different pieces that make it, I guess, fascinating story just from a reporting standpoint. It's fascinating to see how many different angles it does have, even though it could have such a negative impact on the industry. So I think, Oxen is the first one, and I'm happy to take that from the group. I would say, even stretching back into last year, the ramifications of Build Back Better, and, what was Build Back Better and what will be the future of, clean energy incentives and policy in this country, whatever that becomes and whenever it comes together, will be huge for a lot of different industries, and these supply chain questions that we will, I assume, continue to bring up throughout this conversation. So I would say those are the top 2. That's a good chunk of my time right now. Some other ones, interconnection in the queue for renewables right now on the grid is amazing to see. Even a lot of projects that won't end up getting financed and built, there's clear demand, and there's clear momentum on all fronts, even in lieu of certainty and proactive policy decisions. So these things are happening in the absence, a lot of times, of the policy that we thought was needed to make sure that they could get to where they're going. So that'd be my 3. I won't go on any further to steal more of the easy ones.
How about you, Heather?
Big +1 to the whole sort of macroeconomic energy independence / security / supply chain nationalism that's going on. I'm seeing it a lot with respect to the battery portion of storage and EVs, with a lot more focus on sort of this recycling and urban mining operations, especially with the money that Ford and General Motors have been throwing at these platforms, sort of the design. So circular design kind of making its way into the clean tech space. The other thing 2 things I'd like to bring up is software. I mean, we continue to see a furious amount of investment in platforms that are managing carbon accounting at companies. So I consider that to be a big part of this space: supply chain analytics, supply chain sourcing, how do you pick the cleanest things? And then the other thing that I'm really focusing a lot on is sort of carbon tech. So not just carbon removal, but carbon removal that has the added benefit of what are you going to do with this stuff? How can you make money with these emissions? Where can it go into materials, concrete, textiles, you name it?
Got it. Jeff, how about you?
I guess I would start by focusing on what can be done at the federal level in the absence of kind of a clear policy pathway forward for whatever remains of the Build Back Better agenda. A couple items there. The infrastructure bill does have enormous amounts of money that will be going toward EV charging infrastructure, which is going to be a big deal. And while it takes some time to figure out how to spend that money and how to set up the state federal partnerships that are going to get it done, that's going to be an enormous investment that brings a lot of opportunities, a lot of difficulties in figuring out how to get all that load onto the places where the grid can support it. I'm really excited to see how FERC has been taking action on its transmission reform agenda. The notice of proposed rulemaking that they issued last week on regional planning and cost allocation, the first of a number of items they've got on their agenda. I know that transmission takes years and years to get done, so I don't know if it's appropriate to talk about this being a hot topic for this year or the first 4 months of this year, but you got to mark it at some point, and this seems like a good initial effort. I'm going to be really excited to see what can come out of that broader transmission policy development effort. And then I think, just the rising, the fact that we've got the climate crisis coming into starker and starker relief, not just from the kind of data we're seeing out of the IPCC and IEA, but out of the lived experiences of people going through the winter storm in Texas and the hurricanes in the Gulf Coast and the heat waves in California and the greater West, the Pacific Northwest, may be helping to drive the state leaders, policymakers, and regulators that are in charge of the stuff that determines whether or not you can really get distributed energy deployed at significant scale, and trying to figure out the ways to remove the bottlenecks and align the incentives or disincentives that exist right now to make that happen. These are things that I guess I've been spending 12 years covering and wondering when the phase change is going to occur that allows the technology that is perfectly capable of doing a lot of this stuff to be brought in and enabled through the regulatory and kind of economic structures that would allow it to really take off. So that's going to be real. I'm excited to see some progress happen. I'm not holding my breath, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
All right, Yulia, I got from the grimace, I got the sense Jeff took your FERC one, so you can actually second it if you want, but
FERC is our bread and butter for Utility Dive.
Yeah, St. John,
but
you and Canary Media need to butt out. You need to butt out of that topic.
Well, no, I will say that on Order 1000, on looking at transmission, the trend that I think we see throughout FERC is that has been really a hot topic in the first part of this year, and I think for 2022, is on opening up competition and the complexities of the markets where we're adding more competition would in any way impact reliability, as many others claim it will. And those types of discussions, I think that we're looking at how different markets, different grid operators are considering to change how they will do their auctions, and a lot of Cleantech is certainly looking at the Commerce Department investigation, but they're not paying attention to this as well. We haven't mentioned offshore wind yet. That's been a huge news this year of
Hey, leave that
having
for
yeah.
She's feeling cannibalized, Zach. Jeff ate Julia's topic list. She's going to now eat Darius's topic list. That's
There's a lot of toe stepping going on here.
It's a ruthless bunch.
Well, I mean, I cover a lot of offshore wind of just I think the most interesting discussion to me in offshore wind is we're getting so much interest and so much competition in these auctions. how much will market entrants pay for federal leasing, and how much will they still be able to give to the local areas when it costs so much, when they have to pay so much to the Treasury that will then be distributed to all of the US, not just the New Jersey state or New York, wherever these big projects are coming online. So I'm sorry, I feel like the last people should only get one, but also net metering. Okay, I'll leave it at that.
All right, Darius, you're up.
Well, you can have net metering if you want to, Julia. I don't think many people scrapping it up for that. Yeah. So I think obviously I'm always I'm a terrible offshore wind board. Ask anyone in my household, but I do think that I'll flip my big three around fractionally, say that it's obviously not just New York Bight. And yes, where does the 4.4 billion go, and how does it find its way back to building a supply chain that doesn't exist yet to build the 30 gigawatts in the next 9 years? But obviously, ScotWind, 25 gigs of offshore wind, a lot of floating, which again is going to be a catapult to the European industry and hopefully more widely. And we heard out of IPF today, yesterday, Sarada at BOEM and today Lefton saying they're throwing open the U.S. Gulf, they're throwing up the deep water Central Atlantic, they're throwing open Oregon. So, open horizons for offshore wind, but you got to build it, right? So I think we can all get very breathless about the potentialities, but ultimately this is about supply chain, and this is really about a deployment rate that people often refer to as sort of military scale, right? Just for ease of analogy, and hopefully not any misplaced reference to the current state of things in Europe. So I mean, I think offshore wind obviously continue to be hugely exciting. Again, how do you get to 2 terawatts by 2050? Anyone's guess, and it's going to be very different in Americas versus Europe versus Asia too, invariably. I think my other big theme was a single man, Andreas Nouwen, who was Siemens Gamesa's CEO up until a few weeks ago. His firing really, obviously, he was kind of not quite the canary in the coal mine, but I mean, there's so much blood on the rugs of the OEMs. At the OEMs these days, I mean, Vestas is the only Western OEM to make any money last year. The cost margins are non-existent. These are the machines you need to build the 2 terawatts offshore, or indeed it was called 360 gigawatts that are needing to be built, at least by GWEC's estimation, in the next 20 years by the industry. So we're being told we need to ramp up fourfold in terms of wind build out. Where are these machines coming from? Where's the new regulation that will actually speed things to speed these projects into existence? Even if you want to build, how many, say floating wind, how many gigs of floating wind by 2030? Well, if you start now, you need 8 years to build one of these projects. So, what are the chances? Maybe 2035 is it's a better deadline now for a lot of the deep water and more challenging offshore wind. So Andreas Nouwen, I mean, just to come back to that just briefly, I mean, this is a guy who's run Siemens very effectively, except onshore, if you like, right? And it just reflects the real very hard reality that all this cost is offloaded onto the turbine makers, and they're the ones that obviously are bleeding most profusely at the minute. I would think third point, inescapably the war in Ukraine. Again, not really. I mean, we reported on it very much sort of in an industry-specific way. So when Enercon's turbines went down from that Russian cyber attack, or indeed when Ukraine's biggest wind farm under construction stopped being under construction, we covered it from those fronts. But the reality is this is an energy independence, climate action, sort of portmanteau reality. And and if you consider again this opportunity to accelerate the energy transition, we didn't take advantage of during the pandemic. In a sense, perverse as it is, here comes another chance to really turn the spigot off on gas and ramp up on renewables in all their forms. I mean, DNV's revised all its figures now upward for its next energy transition report, just based on Ukraine alone. So I'll leave it there, but I think that's sort of the recharge view these days.
Let's round out with Dan and then Tim. Dan, you're the 3 big things you're seeing this year.
Yeah, so I think the first one, and it ties into so many other things we're seeing, is just looking at prices. Prices in the clean tech sector and clean energy sectors. Looking at solar PPAs, looking at some of the battery raw material costs. For the entire time I've been covering this stuff, which goes back to 2008, we've been in this downward price, seemingly going on forever into infinity, in which everything becomes free. And I think that, and it was clear that that this would end at some point, and it's fascinating watching just this question of kind of what moment are we in and how long is it going to last? I've heard people say, a year or two, and that this downward price cycle for, say, the various solar inputs will go down. We'll see them go down again. The same for batteries. But that's one of the most important questions right now, because it has a lot to do with, well, just how much these things cost and just the attractiveness, aside from government incentives and aside from government mandates, just kind of deciding whether to do a project or not and how much it's going to cost and how big a project you can do. So prices is one. And then the second one is, and it was just mentioned briefly, but net metering. We're probably all watching what's happening in California, which is, my goodness, a fascinating ongoing story that is nowhere close to complete. And there's a bunch of other states where how the situation in California is resolved will have knock-on effects, or will, at the very least, animate the kinds of discussions taking place in dockets in those states. And the fact that California is unresolved, there's a bunch of other places where it's just kind of like, well, man, we can't use that California example to say that this is now mainstream. So I'm watching that closely as well.
All right, Tim.
I knew I was going to get beat to the punch with the DOC investigation and maybe net metering, but the kind of DER bubble maybe being pushed by the tangible effects of climate change. I thought I was going to sneak in with that one. I got scooped on all three, but yeah, I would say leading into 2022 and definitely to start the year was the net metering fights. Obviously, California and then Florida were the big ones for us, and then kind of the pervasiveness of this whole cost shift argument, obviously with solar, that shows up every time net metering is debated in any sense at any level, and just kind of the pervasiveness of this argument. Beyond that, I did kind of want to go into, until Jeff did it, the climate change forcing a focus on more distributed kind of local energy style deployment. So I guess on the other end of that, big focus has been how climate change, especially wind and hail, are driving hardware changes both on the module side when modules are available, which is not obviously looking great at the moment, and then on like the tracker and other hardware side. So, as flat, non-extreme weather prone land is taken up and entirely gone, what changes are being made on the hardware side to mitigate those effects, and how, larger format, big sail modules are throwing old calculations out the window, kind of driving design changes there. Yeah, that's kind of the toughness of going last. I feel like I didn't come in with any original ideas.
We say the best for last, the most agile. All right. So
also, isn't it just amazing that we're clamoring to mention things like tariff cases and FERC and offshore wind? I feel like a year ago it would have been a little niche for maybe not a year, but 2 years ago certainly.
Yeah.
Just call us all the Geek Squad. Just do that, right? All right. So some of you touched on this question, but I think if one sets aside, if it's possible, the awfulness of the war in Ukraine, it's bad. Julia, you grew up in Romania, I think, and Jack, you live a good chunk of your life in Poland. You may have some perspectives on this, but if you set aside the moral awfulness of it, 5 years from now, let's assume the war is done in 5 years. Do you think the war in Ukraine will accelerate, or will it hinder clean economy scaling, and why? And Zach, you got a piece up about the European countries have 15% plus plug-in vehicle sales.
Yeah, I'm actually I'm actually editing the latest report right now. It's 22% last month of new car sales were plug-in vehicles. Well, I mean, I think the U.S. has its own special place in the world. So I think, we know that it depends on who's in power in politics, how we respond. But I think this is a huge deal in Europe. My wife is Polish. I lived in Poland for 11 years. Right now, Russia is shutting off gas supply to Poland and Bulgaria. Poland gets 45% of its natural gas from Russia, and Bulgaria gets, I think, an even bigger chunk. And it's hard to talk about. It's a very difficult situation right now, but for a long time, I would say the approach Europe has had with Russia is, if we play nice and we have a good interconnected economy that supports everyone to some degree, and we're all interdependent, nothing crazy is going to happen. And I think the wake-up call was very quick earlier this year when Russia invaded Ukraine in such a dramatic way. And I think one of the biggest surprises is how strongly and united Europe has responded in an effort to wean themselves off of Russian fossil fuels. Of course, this can't happen immediately because they've developed such a tremendous dependence on those fossil fuels. But I would assume that anyone in significant power situation in Europe who's not a far right winger trying to take over France or some other country is looking very seriously at how they can accelerate the detachment of that dependence on Russian fossil fuel. So I think it will accelerate, especially in the sort of the kind of gray areas, the kind of less discussed, less hot, less fun areas. It will accelerate a transition off of fossil fuels. That's the general take, I think. I would just add, we're partnering with Avir Ukraine. Avir is the biggest EV association in Europe, and the Ukrainian arm is hosting an EV webinar soon. And we're going to support it, be part of it. I think you have to really look at how Ukraine has looked at this issue. They've been extremely strong on distributed renewables, on self-reliance, energy independence, renewable energy. They've always been one of the most inspiring peoples I've ever met in all of my travels all over the world for these Cleantech conferences. And they've been leaders in EV adoption, despite being less wealthy than Poland and other countries a little bit further west. So that's my long rant on it. But I think the one silver lining out of this is that Europe will detach themselves from fossil fuels quicker, hopefully a lot quicker as a result of this.
I guess
Julia?
I just want to add a little bit of cynicism that I believe what Zach says is true in just perspective of Russian fossil fuels. I think that it is still a little early to view this as the kick in the pants that economically, globally we needed to move on to clean tech. Let's not forget that, at least in the US, coal use also increased a lot in response to the natural gas prices. And there are still a lot of momentum for natural gas exporters in the US who are, clamoring to help ease back away from Russia. I think that the trends I'm seeing is definitely a lot of political will to move away from Russian resources. And I hope to keep seeing really encouraging trends on adoption of renewables as like all the commitments that have been made. I mean, you don't want to see the commitments that have been made so far for climate-wise get walked back, but it's very hard for a lot of countries to stay on an advanced track when they're dealing with a lot right now. Yeah. Just leave it there.
Anybody else have thoughts on this topic? Darius, I know you're usually working out of Europe, but also probably use a stateside perspective on this.
I mean, I don't know. Again, my father escaped from Lithuania during the Second World War, and I was raised in Canada. I think that all that I'm seeing there, again, from the remove and to be sure, the physical comfort of being in Canada, not in Europe currently. it speaks to the fact that I don't think it's not going to be the kick in the pants, but I think again it's this conflation of energy security, energy independence, and climate action that I'm hoping is kind of going to be you create kind of a virtuous circle toward toward faster deployment. But I mean, again, this is it's very easy. You sit down. I mean, you sit down a lot of the conferences we all attend, and invariably targets are well, they're not even on paper anymore, are they? I mean, they're not, I was going to say not worth the paper they're printed on, but on our screens. And when you attended CIRA and you hear people just sort of this seemingly heartfelt applause for U.S. government plans to ramp up oil and gas drilling again, you just rather feel there's some most profound financial strive that we all have. It really is is never going to free us to do what needs to be done here. I think the BNEF figures, BNEF is this energy transition investment number now. The second year they've done that. It went from 500 billion to 727 billion, and huzzah! But it's still going to have to triple and then double again to get to the levels we need to get to, in theory, to get to the Paris climate targets. So, and as I say, we knew that the pandemic presented this, in theory, once in a generation opportunity to accelerate the shift to renewables, not just in Europe but globally. And 6% of total government spending went into clean energy over the space of 2 years. So I mean, clearly we're quite deeply dyed in the wool in our practices as an energy producing and consuming planet. So ultimately, again, I think it's invariably it's the swing between hope and despair. I think that we all ride that pendulum a lot of the time. But repower EU as a strategy, yes, could definitely. Again, the targets are higher, so we've gone back to 450 gigawatts of offshore wind rather than 300 by 2050. But again, how do we get to that point? I will say just again, offshore wind, but it does have that great kind of Venn diagram of industrial redevelopment, clean power production, and indeed a kind of repurposing of marine and oil and gas and all the other industries that have functioned offshore for the last 60 years. At least 60 years, or maybe 600, 6,000 years, in a sense, to really reach a point where clean energy production becomes baseload in a meaningful way. And then obviously we can talk about attaching hydrogen to that and how different that would the narrative would look there. If we're, IRENA had that. I'll close on this, but IRENA had that its latest report, I've forgotten the actual title of the thing now, had a very interesting graphic which showed potential future hydrogen trade routes. And it was just a global map that, if you didn't know it was hydrogen, you would have thought it was, some other commodity, wheat or oil or whatever else. And I just thought it was, that was one of those moments of hope. Okay, that's how it's going to look in 20 years, right? We'll just be shipping commodity that is hydrogen produced by offshore wind or whatever else. And that'll be how we run our economies globally.
Dan, you had a piece, Germany's new government had big plans in climate, then Russia invaded Ukraine. What happens now? Thoughts you have on how does Cleantech come out a few years from now? Slingshotted or slowed?
Well, it's my answer with these kind of forward-thinking questions when they're in the middle of a crisis. I mean, my honest answer, and we've had some very good answers to this question. My honest answer is, I don't know. There's just so many variables and there's just so much uncertainty. I mean, it certainly looks like in Germany, in the short term, this would seem to be accelerating some aspects of a transition away from fossil fuels, but it certainly also is good for the coal industry in Germany, and at least in the short term. So it's, I would guess with a uncomfortably high degree of uncertainty that this is going to lead to a slightly quicker momentum on the clean energy transition. But heck, it's so hard to say. I mean, a year from now we should have a much better idea. But yeah, it's just it's a real question mark.
All right, Tim, Heather, Jeff, do you have any final questions on that? We move on to storage. Okay, storage. I once had a CEO client say that storage is in a beautiful state of chaos. So my question for you is, how would you describe the state of storage, and has lithium won the race already? I think that's important because many of you talk about storage and transmission. I mean, Heather, I think you had a tweet out recently about on this topic, but thoughts on just where our ability to store all this renewable energy is going. Floor is open.
Anyone want to talk about fuel cells, or I don't know. Sometimes I always want to be like, oh, are we always going to talk about lithium? To your earlier question,
it's up to you. Just I think storage, how one defines storage, obviously has impact on the size of the answer, but nonetheless, I mean, but what I didn't understand, and we're working for a lithium refining technology company. Until I worked for them, I had no idea that the world's most abundant source of lithium is in what's called brines. Who knew? But apparently, you know, when you go get lithium, you can find it mixed with water and other chemicals in a natural state, but it takes a large amount of energy input to refine that lithium so it can be used in a battery. And their calculation is, unless you resolve that bottleneck, you will retard the scaling of electric vehicles by 350 million vehicles worldwide. I had no idea there was a supply constraint. And then of course there's my mechanic, who is nobody's idea of an EV fan, has a Ford bumper sticker on his truck. He made the case, like he said, what people are waking up now to is the fact that if your battery goes on the fritz, your car is worthless. Like basically when you buy an EV for 25 or 30 grand, 20 grand is locked up in the battery. So, and they catch fire, and you can't put lithium batteries on planes. And there's, you know, there essentially the irrational exuberance around lithium that some are alleging is now bumping up against some of the realities of supply constraints and technological usability. But I'll ask again, what's the state of storage, and has lithium won the race? Anybody want to venture a guess or an answer on that one?
I mean, I'll just jump in quickly. I don't deal in battery tech itself as much as when batteries are a resource to support renewables, but I think it's clear that lithium has won the race in terms of 2 to 4 hour, you know, grid scale storage, at least where we're at. The price of lithium continues to drop even in the midst of all of these supply chain challenges that you just mentioned, Mike. So again, the market's moving in a good direction to support more lithium deployment. I think where I deal in storage more often is also, again, these interconnection challenges that every resource is facing. I think, you know, a lot of these developers that I speak to who are buying as many batteries as they possibly can right now are having difficulty deploying them on the grid because grid operators and utilities view battery storage different in almost every region. Is it load? Is it generation? Is it, you know, how do we classify a battery at its, you know, nameplate capacity the same way we would the coal plant that it is going next to or replacing? You know, those are all challenges that battery storage operators and developers are dealing with right now. So I mean, that's where I deal with it more often, is that you know, prices are declining. That's helping. But again, deployment is really, you know, constrained by the aging and challenging grid that we have.
Darius?
I want to sort of actually deflect and put a question back to, you know, the sort of the solar editors of the solar sector editors in the room. And that, the first thing to say is, I mean, the long duration energy storage narrative that I saw, say, a year ago looked much healthier, or rather the long duration energy storage narrative I see today looks much like the one I saw a year ago. It does feel like this kind of stasis has set into a lot of the mechanical, chemical, and gravity-based, you know, these systems are going to provide the backdrop to the 2 to 4 hour you know, battery storage that we're going to build in everywhere. And so I wonder if that's, you know, one of these bit of a sort of .com bubble situation, insofar as all these interesting startups developing, you know, again, you know, technologies which are engineers' dreams, but crossing the valley of death, etc. So that was my contribution on what I sort of saw of storage of late. Again, hydrogen obviously has already taken so much discussion in the storage space, you know, for many. But the question I wanted to put to everyone else, especially those who are covering solar, was how about Gemini? I mean, because I think, again, storage isn't anything in a vacuum. What's going to be most interesting, U.S. from the way I see it, is the solar storage combo, right? That's the hybrid that's really going to change the face of the way American produces and stores and then transmits its power. So I just, with that, with the, I guess, the final investment decision now taken this week, how does everyone see, that particular sort of hybridization of technologies changing the market landscape in the US?
That sounds like a question tailor-made for Mr. Sylvia.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the solution moving forward. And I think it's kind of been the solution that has been, getting moved to for the last couple of years, where you see greater uptake. Very infrequently are large projects being proposed just as solar installations. They're increasingly solar plus storage. And I just wanted to kind of say that I think it's true that lithium has kind of won the race as we stand now, especially when it comes to the financials working out. But and obviously this is just one battery in a sea of batteries that have been installed. But every time an APS battery catches fire, it's always going to raise questions and concerns about lithium. Obviously, it's not even allowed as an indoor storage solution in some states. I know New York. So I think as long as safety concerns persist, however real or widespread those concerns are, there are always going to be, people looking for alternatives. And I do think that the startup kind of engineer's dream market that was kind of referenced earlier is definitely healthy. I mean, I get pitched a new battery storage technology or two, or at least claiming to be new, every single day. It's just, for that 2 to 4 hour mark, nothing price-wise can touch lithium. The only other thing I guess I would have to add on this is that, and this might be a little bit tangent or out there, is that, we're seeing a lot of impacts on the potential of the storage market, with the obviously Department of Commerce investigation, with so much storage being tied to solar. Any significant impact on the solar industry is going to be a significant impact on the storage industry. So I guess in short, I would say, lithium has won the race, however many laps in so far, but I don't necessarily think it's over so long as safety concerns exist.
Yulia?
Oh, I totally agree with what Tim said. And just to Darius's question on, is it on the co-location role of storage, I think it's going to keep growing with wind, and we are seeing more offshore wind pitches. Of course, you've all pretty much seen them or written about them, that are going to be involving storage, or there's states that are asking specifically for storage considerations. I think something that's really interesting is we have seen lithium ion be hailed as a winning resource, but from the utility dive perspective, we write about different applications, different roles that storage will have in the grid, from the different, is it supposed to be an adequacy, a resource adequacy? Is it more resilience? Is it there for the co-location? I think, or what is the nature of how behind the meter it is, how the utility has access to it? I would say that there's still so many new examples of, it feels like there's a lot of bigger projects that are being pitched that claim to be the first utility partnership of this kind, the first thing to utilize storage of this kind. And that just speaks to its flexibility and how much it can grow. As far as alternatives, I don't know, there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of exuberance in a lot of clean tech, like hydrogen. I think there's a lot of talk of hydrogen liquefaction, of how can we use intermittent resources that aren't needed for the grid and store those and deploy those. Those are, of course, just really excited for the billions that are promised in the infrastructure bill. But I think that there's a lot that could give storage a run for its market share.
If I can just jump in real quick. Oh, sorry, Mike, you're on mute. This is Jeff. I got to say that it was notable that in January, California, a bunch of California community choice aggregators got together to do the first big long duration storage procurement, and they picked lithium ion batteries, 592 megawatt hours of them, or 552 megawatt hours of them. I guess they're just building twice as many batteries as they would for 4-hour storage, and they're getting 8-hour storage out of it. But I guess it begs the question, where else could they get 552 megawatt hours of storage from any other technology that can be delivered in the time period required right now? I mean, seems to me that maybe you could get flow batteries, and you could get a flow battery developer to promise that amount, and you could deal with the round trip efficiency losses as compared to lithium ion. All the other projects, as far as I know, are more like civic engineering, public works projects, and they are kind of like, you know, solar storage project development style projects, right? I mean, you're going to build pumped hydro, you're going to build compressed air energy storage, you're going to, you know, they're just different animals entirely. So it's tricky. I do think that there's going to have to be some significant policy developed, just as with hydrogen as a energy storage medium, to kind of supplant lithium ion batteries, because you can buy them and install them without getting a government to fund an enormous, you know, public works project. I don't know.
Jeff, I think somebody that I think Canary profiled a while back is a friend of, not a client, but a friend of mine, John O'Donnell with Rondo. He's got big, I'm going to inelegantly summarize his technology. He has basically a big cinder block, and they make it really hot. They insulate the hell out of it. And basically it's thermal storage. And John's point, I think if he was on this call, he'd say, well, Jeff, you're forgetting, we can store heat much more cheaply than we can store pressure, or we can store electrons. Now, I'm the one wearing the dense cap on this call, so I'm not, you know, I don't propose to say that John's right, but I think there's people who would say, like, there's a company called Breeze that's got compressed air technology using existing but idled oil and gas pipelines to store it for 50+ hours. So I think if we had a bunch of storage startups on this call, they would be screaming and jumping up and down saying, no, lithium's constraint day is coming. Do you think they have a point?
Yeah, for sure. You need long duration, daily, weekly, seasonal storage, but how are we going to pay for it? How do you make a project where you can say, here's what a seasonal storage unit of seasonal storage is worth? That's not how energy markets work, as far as I know.
Yeah.
It seems like someone's got to make up, governments and grid operators and regulators have to get together and figure out how we set the price for that thing. We really don't ever want to have to use it, but we need it. So how do you pay off something that you never want to have to use? That's tricky. I don't know.
Got it. I should note with this, man, time's flown. We're 8 minutes away from wrap up time. So that's, it's really, these are incredibly rich conversations. All right.
Your favorite question. Yeah.
Okay. Question for you. Are we at the place where commercial execution matters more than what policymakers do? Now, I'm not including rogue dictators with nuclear arsenals in that cohort, but I've often thought that one of the lessons we learned from the Trump administration was that try as they might to have slowed things down, they did not. Now, maybe that's because Rick Perry's not the sharpest tool in the shed. I think he's in the sub-Mensa club, and you know, he wasn't the most functional crew that was trying to shoot straight on that one. But there's a lot of gloom and doom right now on political fronts that Biden's going to get his clock clean in the midterms. You're going to have Majority Leader McConnell and Speaker McCarthy, as long as he's not caught on tape again. And you know, these guys, it's going to be we're going to introduce a very frosty time. And you look at, you know, John, you've got a podcast coming up in a few days where you're interviewing the instigator of the tariffs. So I'm just looking for all of you, like, writ large, is clean economy got enough momentum that unless severely disrupted by ill-informed policymaking, it's now in the commercial sector's hands? Or are we still heavily or mainly influenced by policy? It's kind of like, which one matters more? I guess that's my question. Thoughts on this, John? We'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, we had clean tech advancements throughout the Trump administration as well. I mean, it may have been rockier in a lot of different areas, but it still happened. So yes, the market is continuing to be fueled by that corporate demand for renewable energy. Those markets are getting even tighter with a favorable administration. I guess you could say favorable on its face. But again, we keep going back to these policy struggles. I think it's two-pronged. Will clean energy continue to advance if there's a change in administration? I think, or change in power in Washington. I think yes. Will it advance more if we put together proactive policies and supportive policies that fuel those technologies to go faster and bigger? I think that's true too. And we could, it's kind of loosely connected to the whole Oxen deal, so I don't want to try to shoehorn that in, but stuff like a standalone, ITC for storage, that's huge. Will storage continue to be deployed at record pace? Yes. Would a standalone ITC make storage far more plentiful in this country? Yes. So, I mean, there's both of those things. And I think, for the ITC and PTC conversation about the phase down, those always get extended, and I would expect that to happen in a different Congress as well. But yeah, that's my take. A positive policy will fuel faster adoption.
Heather and Dan, where do you come down on the question of which one matters more now, commercial execution or what policymakers do?
Well, I've been, to point back to the Trump years, I mean, that was when it became very clear to me that that's where the rubber met the road, and that the corporations were really driving the agenda. I mean, if in the United States, at least, right? So that has to be the focus. And because we don't have a national policy on energy, really, we don't really have we just don't. We have all these random programs. I think the state level policies matter much more. And I think that's what the corporations have really driven in. So that's where they've also spent attention. They've been able to influence that level in a way that they haven't been at the national level, right? So getting things in Virginia to be able to meet their goals, really working at that level. So I think like I said, the ship has sailed. I think that the momentum is there. It's going to be slower if we have this switch. I mean, it's going to be another annoying, frustrating, whatever years. And it's horrible that we have to keep doing these pendulums. I would like some adult supervision or some adult strategy would be great. But, at least I think the corporations are just sort of like, yeah, this is what we need to do, and we're going to do it.
Dan?
I would agree with that, and add though that a significant element here is that a lot of the largest companies in this space are operating around the world. So you look in particular at the auto industry, and that's the best example, I think. Ford, for example, knows that it needs to switch to a kind of emissions-free model or very low emissions model, and a lot of that is because it needs to meet European Union rules. A lot of it is because it wants to be able to sell into Asian markets as well. And it's like, so in a way, it's not just a question of kind of federal government policy here, but it's kind of federal government policies in a whole bunch of other places, and companies kind of just seeing what they need to do to be able to play in the most places. But taking a couple steps back, I think the premise that this has kind of entered this kind of runaway, the market has taken on a life of its own phase is probably a sound one.
Heather, you had something you want to add?
Yeah,
and then Zach.
I just wanted to build on something Dan was just saying, is that this is a point of competitive advantage for many companies now, right? If they have these products out there, and it's become a source of innovation for them to do this. So this is the next growth wave for a lot of the companies, especially the automotive companies, as you mentioned. So I think that was a great point.
Darius?
I would only sort of chip in that Amazon accounted for 20% of all corporate power purchase last year. Right? So, I think, what is it, 1 and 2 PPAs in the US is corporate. There's no, I mean, Europe lags that way, and Japan is in a bit of a, its own sort of, Japan, Asia, it's in its own world in that respect. I think, corporations, we know, not just obviously in terms of power purchase, but in terms of direct power consumption. BASF is obviously planning to use offshore wind to run some of its petrochemical plants. BEP is now going to run refineries off hydrogen. So there's that whole sort of narrative, obviously working away too in terms of the industrial decarbonization front. But I think there's also this point, if you look at the RE100, when they surveyed their membership last year, the single greatest obstacle to growth for they're responsible, I think it's 340 terawatt hours a year of consumption, is lack of procurement opportunities. So you still can't buy it even if you want it, is the central problem.
Let me do Zach and then Yulia. Zach, I can see you wanted to you want to pass Jeff on the reality background competition. So good on you.
Yeah, I would echo what everybody said on renewable energy. I think vehicles is a different story. I mean, under Trump, he tried to take away California's right to require higher fuel economy, better emission standards, which they've had since the Clean Air Act was passed. That was a big deal. That was a big fight that luckily is over because Biden took over. That's going to be that's something that will be passed back and forth depending on who's in power. And also like the bills. I mean, the huge billions of dollars going towards EV charging infrastructure, which is critical to greater adoption. These things matter a lot for the vehicle industry. And we are far behind Europe and China because Europe and China require a lot more, or you face big fines. And I think this is one thing that could potentially change a lot depending on who's in power in DC.
Yulia, last word on this, and then we got 2 audience questions. I don't know if I got time to get them in, but go ahead, Yulia.
Just wanted to say that I echo what Heather said on states mattering, but I wanted to bring up how there are issues that on fearing what will come after the midterms. There are issues that it seems all of the framing of it comes from companies that would benefit from less competition. I think it's befuddling to us how restricting competition could be supported by GOP, conservative Republican agendas, but it can, because very recently I've seen a lot of testimonies for state legislatures, like in Arizona, bring up how it is an issue of reliability, and markets that are very different from Texas are pointing to Texas and pointing to things of like, well, if we have open retail competition, the utilities will have less control. We could end up in blackouts and less discussions on weatherization. And I just think that the reliability discussion can restrict a lot of growth from the way it's going in the Southwest right now.
All right, I got an audience question. We have 2 here. One is William O'Hearn. He runs external relations for offshore power. He sent me a question before. What can clean energy advocates in the PR industry do to get Americans to fall in love with clean energy? Everything from e-cars to solar and storage, microgrids to offshore energy and wind farms. Anybody, perhaps just one person take that stab, and they've got a question from Aaron Kerrigan. So somebody want to take William's question?
Address the NIMBY concerns.
Okay.
I mean, look at, I love the state level, whoever brought up state level legislation and action. I might be our only representative in the South. I don't know if that's true, but if you look at a lot of state level action in the South when it comes to renewable energy, there's been some significant progress in states like North Carolina with a GOP-led legislature and a Democratic governor. You passed one of the most significant clean energy bills in the country for a state. And if you look at Texas, in Texas, landowners, where I lived previously and was for the winter storm, I'll say that, landowners value getting a resource for the land, like ranching or wind farms or solar. So it's separated from these links to climate goals. This doesn't always have to be about climate for this part of the country. It's about, sound impact on your schools, your community, your roads, your personal pocketbook. That's a winning message in this part, outside of California, New York, and some of these more progressive states. If you show people that this isn't just about climate change, while that's obviously the goal, that's a selling message here. I talked to a legislator in Oklahoma. A Republican legislature killed an anti-wind bill that would have required renewables to shut off 4 days before a winter storm in the name of reliability to kick on coal and natural gas. Republicans rallied against that because of wind turbines in their district that were making money for their residents. And one of the legislators, I know I'm kind of filibustering here, but one of the legislators told me, I'm not one of those tree huggers, but I love wind. That's what he told, that was the quote. And he was the one who killed the bill. So that's my thing for, look at regions of this country differently.
Just one line, that's been critical to Denmark's success with wind, was exactly all the stuff you said.
Yeah, and sorry for taking the
no problem.
Stretch there.
All right, and Aaron Kerrigan gets the last question here. Can utilities keep up with the EV transition, and what is the future of the off-grid commercial market? I guess, Zach, what do you have to say? Can utilities keep up with the EV transition? You and Yulia are probably best equipped on this one.
I'll leave that to Yulia. I mean, there's a lot of research that said it's not a problem. Don't worry about it. But I'll leave to Yulia since she's the utility expert.
I will say utilities are very eager for it. They want to be part of it. I think it's a matter, again, of competition, of who gets to own these resources, because utilities would love to own them and grow their load growth. But the utilities are very much up to the challenge, and there are a lot of resources within investor and utilities to kind of have a unified position on this through their lobbying arms. I wouldn't be too concerned on that front.
All right, editors, reporters, thank you. This is great. I'll close with this question. All of you, you can answer it offline if you want. It's kind of a challenge. I posted this on LinkedIn. I'm going to have more to write on this, but as a former Politico, my question is, can anybody in our audience identify a single elected official, either party or no party, any level of government in any state in the US, who is politically afraid of crossing the clean economy sectors? They're politically afraid, not they're ideologically leaning. So I posted this. The only answers come back is Gavin Newsom, and there's a lot of back and forth, and they knocked that down. So no, Newsom's he was already a climate hawk, so that doesn't really count. So the question is, have we gotten to a stage where there's a single elected official who is politically afraid of crossing this, like people are afraid of crossing AARP or NRA? John, you had a hand up. I'll give you the last word and then we'll sign off.
No, 5 seconds. I would just say anti-wind lawmakers in Oklahoma, as the aforementioned Oklahoma lawmakers are afraid of clean energy.
They're politically afraid of crossing. Okay, if you can name one, John, DM me, because I want to acknowledge that you heard that. Folks, thank you. So great. We're going to be back in a quarter. We're trying to agitate that either at Clean Power or RE Plus, we do this live from the stage. If you think that's a good idea, let the host organizations know. We'd combine it with our podcasters. They're a much more rough and tumble and crazy bunch, but they add a lot of color, and we'll do it as a combo. But thank you all for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. What a great discussion. Take care, y'all.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Bye now.
Thank you.